So a little bit of an introduction of Landev, if there's anyone on the call who's kind of never heard of it and or never seen it, that you can probably assume from the name that Landev has something to do with land development, and you would be correct there. So Landev is our constellation solution for either standalone land developers or home builders who have a strong land development operation. So really its key strengths are in terms of job cost management, tracking your budget, sending out bids to your vendors, being able to generate purchase orders and track change orders against those POs as they develop throughout the project. And then we have invoicing built into the system. There's a scheduling component. We have a lot management tool in there. There's this collaboration web portal, vendor portal that allows your vendors to log in and submit invoices, track purchase orders, view any documents you may have published to them. So there's a lot of things going on in Landev. I'm going to try and cover as much as I possibly can today in kind of overview fashion, but that's my kind of elevator pitch of what Landev is designed to do. Something I like to also mention is Landev is not a true accounting system. So Landev does require one of many accounting systems to integrate with. So there's a number of the Microsoft applications that Cornerstone's familiar with, and I know some of Cornerstone's clients use. It also integrates with the Constellation Neustar system and Fast software, things like QuickBooks, Microsoft Dynamics, the Sage 300, those kinds of things. So Landev, I like to call, is a job cost accounting system, but it's not your true core accounting system that it's not going to manage a general ledger. It can't print checks. You can't post journal entries. So that's where we leverage kind of the core strengths of one of the many accounting systems we integrate with. With that being said, the first place I like to go in these overviews is just a brief overview of the data structure in Landev. So the first thing we have is this activity section. The activities are what are the Landev cost codes. So my sample data is split up into these three categories of cost codes, and then underneath each are the individual cost codes themselves. Landev also has an extra layer that we call resources. So these resources, you can think of them as line items you would see on a purchase order, and they roll up to a cost code. So maybe something like engineering here, that maybe I have one cost code for all of my engineering costs, but I still want to be able to issue a purchase order with some more detail on it, some more line items, the parts, the pieces, the different studies that I'm going to be requesting, and I can track individual dollar amounts for each of these items, either in your budget or your purchase order, which we'll see as we move along. These resources can be as detailed or as summary as you want. So something like this engineering section that's pretty summary level, or something like my sanitary sewer category here that has the different sizes and lengths and types of pipe that you might be purchasing. So you can see an example there that it can get very detailed if that's the type of detail you want to manage. The next thing is, okay, you have activities, you have resources. Now we need some jobs to put those things into. So Landev has this jobs tab and this section that we call the job tree. So in my sample job tree, I have a couple different lines of business or parts of my land development business where I have, here's my active projects, my Canadian operations, my US operations. I have some land acquisition jobs I could build into the tree. Maybe I have some raw land parcels that I'm tracking that I want to track what I paid for that piece of land, any maintenance costs, the mowing on that raw land, anything, any property taxes I might be paying on that, and some inactive projects and some budget templates that I can track here. So what we would do next in Landev is, okay, we have cost codes, we have resources, we have basic data set up, we have our jobs in the tree. So maybe I want to go into my US operations here in my Kingston Station demo project, and I want to see what this project breakdown looks like. So I have some allocations in here that I can track. So maybe there's an amenity center, what I paid for the purchase price of the land, a couple different parks. So you can see that the job tree can be as simple or complex as you want, that I have some more basic projects here that are just a couple of phases and there's no real allocations, or it can get more master plan community styled, like my Kingston Station here that has many different parts and many phases in it, and you can keep adding to this tree over time as that project develops. So in LandDev, now I have our data structure laid out. Then what can you do in the system? So really the main first thing you would do is, okay, I have this new phase, maybe this phase 17 that I started. We have this properties page where you can go in and track a whole bunch of different information about that piece of land. So there's a couple hundred different properties in here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but kind of high level, you can track basic information, some comments about that. You can track your address info, number of lots, number of units, street footage, management info, tax information, purchasing of who was the seller, how much did you buy it for, who are you selling it to. So there's a whole bunch of properties in here, getting down to lot sizing information, acreage, so stuff like that. There's a lot of different properties of information you can track and store in here. And then because LandDev is a SQL-based system, that these are all different fields in the database that are then available for you to generate some custom reporting on, or work with the Cornerstone team to have them help you with some custom reporting as well. So let's say I've gone through, I've created that, I have a new phase in the tree, maybe I'm starting a phase 18, that now your next steps are you can start building out a budget would be the first thing you would do here. So LandDev gives you up to 3 budget building tools to build out that original budget on this job. So what's my day one budget on this job going to be? We have this bank budget, this estimating, and the initial budget. So there are 3 parts of the same process, where maybe the bank budget is your kind of high level estimation or best guess at what you think it's going to cost to develop this. And it's a proposal to the owners or to the bank to say, hey, this is what we think it's going to cost. The estimating would be step 2, where maybe you do some more detailed takeoffs and you add some detail, refine some numbers. You work with your engineer to get some more detailed takeoffs back to really refine that budget. So think of it as 3 steps in the same process that you can use up to all 3 of those steps. But for time's sake, I'm going to start at step 3, which is this initial budget, because I just want to set up my budget and then approve it so I can move forward. And as I go through this, feel free, if you have a question, to type it in the chat, and I'll take a look at that and see if it's either something I can answer right away, or if it's something that I'll get to a little later that we may hold off on that. But please feel free to ask any questions. So as I go through building out this budget, we can see that LandDev has opened an Excel spreadsheet here. So one of the things kind of unique in the way that LandDev operates is we use LandDev as a tool to talk back and forth with the database. Sorry, I think I said LandDev twice. LandDev uses Excel as a tool to talk back and forth to the database, where I open this spreadsheet, it would show me what my budget is, but right now it's blank. So I know I need to start building out this budget by using this insert resource button. And I get this little pop-up screen that allows me to go and select all the different cost codes that I want in this budget. So I'm picking and choosing all the things I need, maybe some recoverables, maybe some contingency, just you can choose whatever you might need in this budget, add it into your little review section, and maybe in landscaping, I want to use some of that resource detail to build this out of what am I actually spending those landscaping dollars on. So now I have all of my items selected I need in this budget, and I could have also copied from a previous phase or a budget template that I may have built out in the tree as a starting place for this budget. So you don't always have to start from scratch. You can copy from an existing phase or another project that might have a budget that's close to this one. Sorry. So, my water went down the wrong pipe. So here's my budget sheet that I've built out. It has all my line items on it. We can see under landscaping has my extra detail. if I had started with the bank budget, I would see my budget numbers here. If I did an estimating budget as well, I could see what has changed since the bank budget. But for time's sake, I'm starting at step 3, which is this override column. And LandDev doesn't have a preference of whether you use all 3. It all comes down to your process. So
Hey,
for
Justin, can you
time,
hear me okay?
yes, I can.
We have a question that may be
Mm-hmm.
appropriate here from Rachel. Can LandDev handle budget changes and track them as well? Is that part of this?
Yes, the LandDev can. So that's a great question. So I can not only put in this original budget, but one of the steps we'll see after is that LandDev can also has 2 different tools to track and manage your budget changes, to move budget money around from cost code to cost code. And there's some nice reporting around seeing those changes over time.
Thank you.
So after I lock in this budget, we'll take a look at how those budget change tools work. So if I set up this original budget, and you can either just type in your budget numbers, maybe you're getting them from an outside source, or maybe you have some formula you want to use, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to use a randomizing formula here to establish my budget here. So I can go through and build this budget out. I'm a very fast budgeter, very fast, efficient, and accurate. Look at this beautiful budget I've built out. And one of the differences we can see is in the landscaping, because I added these resources, that I didn't budget for landscaping overall. I put in the budget for the individual resources, and the sum of those line items are my overall landscaping budget. I'm spending a whole lot on landscaping on this job. It's going to be beautiful. So this is the basic budget building where you're going through adding all your line items. If I realized I missed something, I could go back and add anything additional. I could put in some comments on these line items if there's any extra information I want to say of how they should build the retaining wall, what they should do with the sod, any extra information that might be relevant to this line item. But because my budget is so perfect and beautiful here, I'm just going to do it all in one shot. I'm not going to come back and think about it later. So I want to hit approve and check in here, which is going to tell LandDev to process a workflow on this budget. So what pops up here, and many things in LandDev will trigger a workflow, and it's basically your approval mechanism. So to approve this budget, or to approve a purchase order, an invoice, a budget change, that all of those things have the option to have a workflow on them for who needs to see this and what is their approval limit that they can sign off on a budget being created. In those workflows, you can also attach a document here. So I could go click new attachment, find some sample document here, or maybe it's my backup or a list of assumptions that I've made that you can attach whatever documents the approvers might need to see. But I have this special login, so it'll automatically approve at me, but typically it would escalate up the chain to the relevant people here, and there's emails that go out to each of the approvers to say, hey, there's something waiting for you in your queue for you to log in and review and approve. So I can approve that, and this will go ahead and lock in my budget on this job. Now, once I have a budget, you have options of where you can go from there. So you basically start from a budget, then we can generate bids, we can create purchase orders against the budget, we can invoice against the budget. And to Rachel's questions, one of the things we can do is we can start making budget changes and track those changes over time. So LandDev has 2 tools to track those changes. We have this monthly budget, and we have a variance request tool that the variance request is typically for smaller changes in the middle of the month. Hey, we need to move $5,000 from contingency to engineering for some extra cost, or we need where the monthly budget is more of a process at the end of the month where you're doing your budget review.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump over to a project that has some more historical detail in it that we will get a better picture of this monthly budget working, where I have all of these different historical versions that can track all the changes that I've made in those different versions. And I could also move on to my next month of, hey, I want to go and update my budget on this job. So if I hit create on this monthly budget tool, and this is one of our tools to make budget changes. So I recommend setting this up where maybe this is my I'm planning for my budget for March going forward, so I've named this my 2023-03 version. I could copy from a prior version if there's one that's relevant and has good detail in it for me to copy from, or I could just leave that blank if I don't want to. And this bottom section is this monthly budget also has a cash flow component to it as well. So I can set up the structure of my columns here. I want to start in January. I want my cash flow to begin in March 1st. And then I can load up this workbook if I don't want to modify any of my cash flow periods here. But maybe I want it to go 36 months into the future instead of 24. Now, when I load up this workbook, which is really, I call it a 3-part tool in the system here. So the first part of that tool is a review of where your project is at and all of the work that you kind of do and the data you manage, the purchase orders you issue, the invoices you enter into LandDev, all of it kind of sums up into this tool. And we'll go backwards to take a little more look at each of those steps. But this reporting is kind of the goal and the benefit out of LandDev is that all of this information loads basically instantly to give you a picture of where is your project at the current time. So the first part of this tool is here's all my cost codes. I have the chance to put in a comment or note about some change I might make in this sheet, all the columns about my current job. So I have what was my original budget, and this is where that initial budget we just completed would populate this original budget column and be your locked in historical picture in time of where did you start from on this job. Then all of our budget revisions we've made to date. What's my current budget today? Is this adjusted total budget? There's a few columns related to invoicing. So do you have any pending costs? What have you authorized in terms of invoices? And this accounting cost is what's been sent to the accounting system already. So these 3 columns kind of give you some data on where our invoice is currently sitting. Paid dollars is where have you printed checks for your invoices, your total commitment versus outstanding contract. So what have you issued purchase orders for versus what is still outstanding on those purchase orders? And now we get into kind of part 2 of this tool, and coming back to Rachel's question is this column T is an editable budget column. So, okay, we're planning for the month of March. We know there's some extra costs coming in. So you can actually type over top of these budget numbers to say, hey, we need $50,000 in our budget on paving here. We can go and make some changes to any of the cost codes that you know you either need to increase or decrease to shift budget money around. So think of this as your kind of budget planning sheet of where should your budget be for the next month coming up. You can go through, make all your budget changes. LandDev gives you a sum at the bottom of what is your total change that you're looking at here. But I also noticed that I have some extra money in contingency here. So maybe to account for that $40,000 increase, I also want to decrease contingency by $40,000, and it would allow me to move money from one out of contingency and into my other cost codes. This is allowing me to make these budget changes, and all of those changes will be tracked over time as I move through the system. So as you change your budget, LandDev will also calculate out these cost to complete values. So if I was to change this to 350,000, my cost to complete will recalculate based on what I still have left to spend and what my budget is today. So then I mentioned this is a 3-part tool. So the second part was taking all of the information LandDev provides you, make your budget updates. And then your third part is, okay, we have this cost to complete calculated and this cost to complete difference. So what is the cost to complete difference actually doing here? So it's telling you your cost to complete minus what you've cash flowed into the future. So the third part of this tool is actually the cash flow component to say, when am I going to spend this cost to complete value? So as I scroll over to the right, I have a bunch of historical columns because this project's been running for a while in my demo environment to show me what have I spent in each of these months over time, because they're historical columns in the past. And then from March 2023 going forward, these are now white editable cells where I could say, what am I going to spend in each of these months? That maybe I'm going to spend 300,000 in month 1 and 250,000 in month 2. So option 1 is you can just manually type into those cells, and LandDev will calculate out that cost to complete difference of, oh, I over cash flowed by 57,000. So it gives you that check to make sure that, hey, did you type in your numbers correctly? Your other option is you can also, because this is just Excel, I could type in my 197,000 and divide by 5, and then drag that across my 4 columns here to spread that into the future of when I'm going to spend that $197,000. So there is another option for these cash flows, and this is a new feature we've added into this tool that allows you to use cash flow curves. So I can build out a library of different curves in here for basically how I want to project this cost to complete amount. You can assign a start date and an end date to kind of more automatically cash flow out these numbers. So you can do a combination of using the curves and or manually typing into the cells, but just as a little preview here, that this screen just allows you to bulk apply information. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to say, hey, all of these tasks we're going to accomplish in 5 months. So March, April, May, June, July. It's going to take us exactly 5 months to complete this job. And I want to assign the same curve to everything. Just for time, I'm going to go through and fill these out. I'm going to hit copy and process here. It's going to copy my start date, my end date, my curve type to all of these items. And then you can see in the cost to complete difference, it goes through and calculates out all of those values and just automatically cash flows that out for me based on my start and end date parameters and my curve type that I've assigned. So now it's just, basically gives you a jumping off point or a starting place to say, yeah, this is close, but then maybe I make some manual modifications afterwards. If we're not actually going to spend 19,700 in this month, we're going to spend 10,000 and 9,700 in the next month. So gives you a starting place and allows you to make changes from there. Right. So that's our monthly budget tool. I'm not actually going to process this, but on the topic of how LandDev tracks budget changes over time, that monthly budget is one of the 2 tools where each version I can look back and see what did I change in each of these historical versions. LandDev also has a report specific to budget changes where I can go and see for this sample job, show me all of the changes I've made to my budget in either of the 2 tools over time. So I can go look at this job and see every single cost code, every single positive or negative change I've made to the budget. So it gives you great insight into how has this project changed over time. And because it's Excel, if you wanted to see, hey, what have I changed in just what's gone in and out of my contingency activity over time here, I can use the Excel filters to say, show me everything in contingency. And then I can see, okay, in total, we've decreased contingency by $112,000. That might have been a little long answer related to the tracking budget changes, but that was on my agenda path anyway.
No, I think that was very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. So again, if there's any questions as I go through, feel free to ask, but I'm going to double back a little bit because that monthly budget shows us a lot of information and it's kind of the end product of all of the day-to-day management inside of LandDev. So where do those numbers actually come from? How do they get in there? How do we actually assign committed dollars and what does that look like in the system? So LandDev has these 2 buttons related to purchase orders, where the vendor selection is your tool to select what vendor you want to do what work for you. And then the purchase order button is your created purchase orders and where they live. So if I go back to my phase 18 that I started over here and create a new vendor selection, that this is my landscaping purchase order. I could include one or more line items that I have previously budgeted for. So you can see the only line items I have in here are the ones that I budgeted for at the beginning. So maybe this is my landscaping PO and I want to select just landscaping. You could include utilities if the landscaper happened to be doing some utilities as well at the same time. Whatever might apply, but I'm going to keep it simple. Actually, maybe let's not keep it that simple. Let's include 2 different cost codes. So as soon as I create this workbook, again, it loads an Excel spreadsheet for you to do your work inside of. And there's a bunch of different fields I can manage and populate here. So the workbook name will become the name of my purchase order. This project description is some extra notes or details that you might want to provide to the vendor. Maybe it's instructions of where to drop certain material or how to perform their work that isn't implied from the line items that you've put onto the purchase order. There's also an executive summary that you can include any internal notes. This contract type, so one of the, it allows you to issue a new purchase order, or you can also modify an existing purchase order. So through the same steps I'm going to go through in here, I can either create a new purchase order or add additional work to an existing purchase order that I might have already created. On this job, I happen to not have one, so I'm going to start off with issuing a new one. And then I can also assign a default retention or holdback percentage on this purchase order. So maybe I don't want any holdback. I could zero it out. I could change it to 5. I could make it 15, depending on what I want the default to be there. I can also choose, do I want to send this PO by email to the vendor automatically? Yes or no, by either including or excluding the check mark here. And then I have my line items on my actual purchase order, or line items available from my budget to potentially issue a purchase order for. So I have my utilities, I have my landscaping. So landscaping has the line items that we assigned in that budget. Maybe I want these to sort in a different order. So I want planting to be second. I want the retaining walls to be first. I want them to do the walkway third and the sod fourth. So if I wanted these to sort in a certain order on the PO, I could order them appropriately. And then maybe the utilities are fifth. I also have the option to add a comment. So the same comment box we had in the budget, that I can add additional detail of place sod in northeast. Some kind of relevant information or extension to that line item for additional details that they might need. Then my next box is choosing my vendor. So there's a couple options here. You can either scroll through your list. You can click search here and it pops open a little window where I can go and find a landscaper. Maybe it's maybe this curbing guy also does some landscaping as well. So they're going to be my landscaping vendor. I can insert that vendor in here. Because it's Excel, I can either drag it down or copy and paste. I also have the choice here that just because I only budgeted for this detail, that maybe at the time I budgeted, I didn't know all the utilities work that I needed to do. So I just threw it into this default line item, but now I might have some additional detail. So at the time I'm issuing the purchase order, you can add additional line items onto this purchase order. So I can go to my insert resource, select utilities, and then on this right-hand side that maybe there's some addition, we need some gas power conduits, and this curbing vendor is really branching out. They're also going to do some street lights for us. They're our catch-all vendor today. So I can add that detail even though I did not budget for it. It will allow me to add additional line items into my purchase order screen here. So now I have my extra lines here that maybe this is line 5, line 6, and line 7. I want my same vendor on all of these, so I'm going to copy and paste that, and then I can assign some dollar amounts here, and I'm just going to very much make these up. So it looks beautiful. That's the utilities work they're doing for us. I've assigned my dollar amounts. Everything has an amount here. So I can use this little checkbox confirmation to say, these are the line items that I want to issue a purchase order for. So this is your work of selecting the vendor, putting in your dollar amounts of the work you want them to complete, adding line items of detail if maybe you did or didn't budget for it. And then you can, once I hit approve and check in on this, I will get another workflow pop-up. And this is the workflow to approve this purchase order in the system, that you can check the dollar amount and make sure that everything looks correct there, that maybe you realize that, yeah, maybe I added a zero. This shouldn't be $1 million purchase order, or maybe I wanted to go back and modify some numbers because my boss sent it back to me and said, yeah, that's going to be too high, or my dollar amounts are wrong. That you can use that purchase order as an opportunity to go, sorry, that workflow to go back and say, yeah, maybe we want to reduce some of these dollar amounts to get it under $1 million. So I can go back, approve and check in. I can say approve. It would escalate through the chain of approval. I can attach a document again in here if there's something relevant. But if I just approve this, again, I have a special login for these demos that will automatically approve things at me, and then it will create my purchase order, where typically it would go through that workflow first before automatically creating. But because I have that special login to speed this process up, that I can now see I have a new purchase order created here for Corey's Curbs for landscaping and utilities, my total dollar value. And now I can also, at any point in time, I can get a read-only copy of that PO from this screen to see how beautiful it looks with my company logo, the purchase order number that this is for, the company and job that I've issued this in, my vendor, and if they had an address, if it was a real vendor, the address would populate below the vendor. I can see my purchase order name, the date it was ordered, the date it was last revised, any of those notes. So I mentioned there's that extra field where you can put extra notes or details. So just any kind of extra information you might want to add into the header of the purchase order. And then we get to my actual line items on this purchase order. So I have my line numbers that I put in there because I wanted these to sort in a certain order. The quantity and or unit of measure, the actual line item itself. So my landscaping cost code and the 4 resources underneath of it. So you can see how it kind of indents those line items underneath of landscaping, but showing you that these are overall for landscaping as a whole. Each line item tracks its own purchase order dollar amount by cost code and then by resource. And the thing that I really like about the purchase orders out of Landev is this template in particular includes this invoice column. So at any point in time, you can use the purchase order as a reference to see how much has been invoiced to date against each of these line items, giving you kind of that progress billing feel. So as you enter more and more invoices against this in real time, that this dollar amount will increase. So you can see the purchase order is kind of its own little mini report to see for just this work, where are we at in terms of invoicing versus purchase order value. There's some totaling information at the bottom. There's the opportunity for the vendor to, I mentioned the vendor portal at the very beginning. So the vendor can also open this purchase order in the portal and sign this as well. And their signature would appear on this line to say that they approved it. And then some basic legal verbiage if needed at the bottom. If there's any questions related to the POs, feel free to ask. But next kind of steps are, I mentioned this invoice column, that maybe this is now when, okay, now an invoice has come in from this vendor and we want to actually enter this against the purchase order. So maybe we have one purchase order, or one of my other jobs, maybe there's multiple purchase orders for multiple different vendors, that Landev allows you kind of 2 options in terms of purchase orders. Sorry, in terms of invoices, that in this collaboration button, we have this web portal that opens up in here. So your option is either as an internal employee, I can use Landev to go and add a new invoice in here. but there is also a vendor portal add-on to Landev that allows you to provide your vendors with a login to log into this website on their whatever their preferred browser is, and they can submit their invoices themselves. So if I was Corey's Curbs, I could log into this portal, go to add new invoice in here, and they would have the ability to use this pay from contract function. So let's say I was Corey's Curbs, this dropdown would default to them. And as soon as they select a community and a phase that has an open purchase order, that purchase order and all of its line items appear on the screen automatically for them to start using this purchase order as an invoice entry form that they can track all of their invoice values. They can see contract amounts, contract remaining. They can start typing in what their invoice is for against what line items. So maybe they did $50,000 of work here. They did $25,000 of work there, that they can just use this as their invoice entry form. So either as an internal user or as a vendor, it makes it really easy to enter and submit these invoices into the system. And it takes some of the workload off of your AP team or your LAN team if the vendor's able to log in and submit their invoice against the open purchase order. There's also some tracking for you as well of they can add a document. So if there's some kind of backup invoice that they want to attach, maybe you require them to attach a copy of the purchase order that they've signed, any kind of other items you need them to attach when they're submitting an invoice, that those documents will appear in the top right here. You can get a little preview of it. If the file size is large, you could click the link and it would open it for you to throw it on your other monitor to make it easier. But that preview is intended to help with whoever's entering this invoice to make sure it gets entered against the right line items. Then you'd probably get your invoice number from it, your invoice date, if you need to track a receive date that, hey, it came in last Friday and we're just entering it now. And then your total dollar amount. I'm just going to use my 145 that I entered already. So this is kind of your control total amount for the overall invoice, and then you can apply that amount against one or more line items. So maybe I forgot that there's also $15,000 of work that they did for utilities, so I need to adjust this amount. But if you had an actual invoice, you would make the header and the line items match that invoice attachment. Landev also automatically calculates out your retention and any relevant tax if there was any in this job, but my tax is just included in my total amount. And then I have some retention or holdback that's going to be held here. On each individual invoice, you also have the opportunity to remove the retention, that if you know that this work is complete and you don't want to hold back any retention, I could zero this out at the time and it would remove any of the holdback. I could also increase the holdback if we're particularly worried about this vendor and this work. And then there's some comments and information fields for you to track any relevant invoice information that you want. You can see here this having the purchase order out there where you've issued it kind of makes the invoice entry a lot easier, either on your AP team or on the vendor, that either person would see the same screen to use the pre-coded, pre-formatted line items from the purchase order to enter your invoice values against. And you could enter multiple invoices against this over time. So a question from Leslie: if the vendor enters their own invoice, are we able to go in and reallocate the pay dollars if we find an error? So yes, if you found that they put in $25,000 for planting and it should have been $25,000 for walkway, that you could zero out planting and move it to walkways here. If they made a mistake, you also have the option in the workflow status here that if I'm the first person, so I would typically approve it, but if it came, Leslie, if you were the second person in the workflow and the vendor submitted it, that you would have the option to reject and send it back to the vendor, and you could put in a workflow comment to say, hey, you miscoded this, or maybe they forgot to attach their backup document. So you have the option there to, instead of fixing it for them, you could send it back to them and make them fix it. So either option there. But great question, thank you. So Landev tracks your contract total, contract remaining on the screen. We have a kind of hard stop in the system that you can't invoice for more than the contract value. And then we also give you some budget remaining information here. So you know what you still have left in the budget, that if you needed to do a change order or you needed to move some of this money from landscaping down to utilities, that we just give you that information if you're an internal user. So if I was the vendor, I would not see that budget remaining info. Now this invoice is great, looks fantastic. I want to hit submit and send it into the workflow. But again, because I'm logged in as an internal user, that it will automatically approve by me. And now it is a basically fully authorized invoice waiting to get sent to the accounting system to get paid. But I can start looking at reports. I can start seeing it on as an actual in the system. I have this little invoice transaction report where I can see that invoice entered here for utilities and landscaping. I can see what retention has been held. I can go and find the backup document that's been attached at any point in time. So this is your kind of quick and easy invoice lookup tool. Maybe at this point that, hey, we're a month into phase 18, let's say, and we want to get a job cost overview report, that I can go to my report section in Landev here, go to job cost summary. This is your kind of quick and easy summary overview report of where is this job at today. If I generate this, I can see kind of job status, where am I at on this project. So I have all of my cost codes, what's my original budget that we just created, any changes that I've made so far, what's my current budget today, any committed costs. So here's the purchase order line items that I've entered. Here's any accounting amount, so any invoices that I've processed as well. And in real time, this available dollars calculates based on what's my current budget minus my committed cost, and what do I still have available in that budget. So this can help you influence decisions of where you can move budget money around. Are you over budget anywhere if you're allowing yourselves? Because Landev has a control in there. Can you go over budget? Yes or no? So if you were to go over budget, you might use this available dollars column to influence going to that monthly budget report to move budget money around, for example. So any questions on, I just did one of the types of invoices. I'll go back and do an invoice directly against the budget, but if there's any questions on the invoicing or on this report we're looking at first before I move on to that, feel free.
Hey, Justin, maybe you can just talk for a minute about once an invoice is approved by yourself, what is the process to send it over to the accounting system?
Yep. So that is a great question. So if I was to close out this report, so what Landev does, and in my case, my Landev is connected to our Neustar product, that if I go into the system section, there's this invoice processing workbook, and it's kind of like an invoice gatekeeping workbook, because we know and love our accounting friends, but they can be very particular that they don't love when things magically show up into our accounting system. So with most of the accounting systems, we have some kind of control like this in place, that any approved and authorized invoice, like that one we just entered, sit in this kind of pending area waiting to be released to the accounting system. So I have all of these invoices that I've been entering maybe throughout the month or throughout the week that are waiting to get sent over to the accounting system. And I believe this is the one here that we just entered. So I'll just make that bold for the fun of it, so we can see this invoice more easily. That, okay, here's our invoice number, invoice date, it's for Corey's Curbs, here's the two cost codes, the dollar amount. So if I needed to get the backup attachment, that I can see the purchase order, I can click this link here to open up the attachments that might be included in that invoice. So in this workbook, we're trying to give the accounting team all the details they need related to this invoice, that they would then just take it off of hold here and approve and check this in to send it over to the accounting system. So think of this We have kind of nicknamed this and affectionately started calling it invoice jail. So all of these invoices are currently in jail waiting to be released to the accounting system to have a check printed for them. So that process would take that invoice off of hold, send it over to the accounting system, and just for a sample of what that looks like once it's been sent over, I'm just going to flip over to one of my other jobs that has many historical invoices. That one of these invoices here, they all have a check number populated, so they've been sent over to Neustar. They've had a check printed for it, so the check number and check date will populate here. And then we also have the accounting batch number. So if this was sent to the accounting system, there's a reference number for either the land or the accounting team to go and look this up in the accounting system if they needed to do any kind of other verification of it. So particular to our Neustar integration, you get all that detail back and forth between the two systems. So another thing to mention on the invoicing conversation is not all of your invoices will go against the purchase order. It's definitely ideal and recommended to have as many purchase orders as possible because, as you saw, it makes it a lot easier on the invoice entry. But as an internal user, I also have the option to do a pay from budget invoice here. So there might be some permits, some fees, things that are outside of the purchase order work that you get an invoice for. So I'm able to manually enter an invoice directly against the budget. I'm just going to change back to my phase 18. Maybe now we have some engineering work that happened that I can go through, enter my invoice header information the same way for community, phase, vendor, invoice number, invoice date, dollar amount. Maybe this is $5,000 of engineering work. And the main change when you're doing this pay from budget type is instead of having those pre-coded purchase order line items like we saw previously, that you do have to apply this to the community, the phase, the activity, and the resource manually. So it's not a whole lot more work, but it's definitely a lot easier to just have the purchase order line items there for you to type in a dollar amount. Maybe this is $5,000 of engineering work. I can add this line item, and there is my manual invoice coded $5,000. We have the budget remaining calculation here. So if I was allowed to go over budget, it would let me continue with this, but maybe I realized I picked engineering and I don't actually have an engineering budget in here. So maybe I picked the wrong thing. So I want to put this into utilities instead. I can add that, and it tells me I still have $406,000 in my budget. Looks great. I could add a document if I needed to, but let's just submit this, and it would go into the workflow the same as that pay from contract invoice. So those are the main kind of core items in LandDev. I know we have a couple minutes left, so I'll touch on a couple of the other features as well. So LandDev can generate bid requests here where you select line items that you want to include in a bid form, and the vendor either gets a form like this Excel sheet emailed to them that has, here's all of your cost codes and items that you included in that bid form. So they're going to bid out the detention pond, the water, the utilities for me. There is another option. So again, if you're using the vendor portal and I was logging into this collaboration, this URL as the vendor, there's also the option for them to complete their pending bids directly on this online form. So I'm going to go, I don't remember which one that other one was, but okay, it's this one. Okay, here's the detention pond, the water, the utilities. They could put in their pricing information, their notes if they have them, and upload a document. So it makes the process a little more seamless and gets the vendor more involved. So they're not just filling out an Excel spreadsheet and emailing it back to you. It also gives them historical tracking of all previously submitted bids that they've done. They can see any open purchase orders that have been issued to them, where they can see what's been invoiced against it, what's the total dollar amount. They can open the PDF directly from the portal here, so they don't have to harass your team to get a copy of a purchase order if they lost it or their dog ate it or they dropped it in the mud, whatever happened, that they can kind of empower themselves to get that purchase order. They can see if it's been signed. If I was a vendor, I could click this sign button and my session timed out at the perfect time. So they can click sign here, and then on the screen, if I was logged in as a vendor, underneath of this vendor signature space would be a little white box for them to draw their signature in, and then that would show up on the purchase order itself, like this other beautiful one over here that has my fantastic signature that looks like I drew it in 3rd grade, but it is beautiful. And couple other things to mention. We have the ability to generate lien waivers, and it's apparently LandDev's ready for lunch, that you can generate lien waivers out of here for the vendors again to sign as well in this portal. There's a scheduling component to LandDev as well. So on my demo phase, I have this schedule built out that has my parent items, my predecessors, my successors, duration, lag, start date, finish date, what vendor's in charge of that task. There's a component in here of a to-do list. So if I wanted to see only the line items assigned to me in the schedule, I could filter to this to-do list to see, okay, these are the 5 things that I'm in charge of. Looks like I'm quite behind on entering my budget and scheduling this internal meeting, but there's still time because we have until 2024 to finish this job.
I would encourage anyone who wants more information, either reach out directly to Justin or through Cornerstone. We're happy to pass it on to Justin. We have a lot of success stories together. And that's about it. We thank you very much, and we hope that you'll be joining us next month for our next seminar. And once again, Justin, thank you very much for today. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks to all the attendees for joining.